Welcome back to Wordy Wednesday. First thing I need to do is apologize for the weird coloring of this video. Yeah, I know part of it is this is kind of purple and this is kind of purple, but I'm filming in the back bedroom and there's no natural daylight here. So we have a very weird bright white artificial light, which is probably making things look a little odd. So my apologies. Summer in Pennsylvania, what are you going to do? At least I managed to turn the air conditioning off so we don't have to compete with the sound. So you saw the title of this. Who died and made you the boss of my language? Well, the question is, of whom do we ask that question? Who is it that gave us all these nonsense rules that say you must say of whom do we ask that question, not who do we ask? And that's something that we are going to talk about when we come back. There are some quick and easy answers to this because there were a couple of pioneers in prescriptive linguistics. So we need to define prescriptive, first of all, because there are two meanings to this word. Prescription is tricky. First meaning is to suggest something for someone's good, for their benefit. So a doctor gives you a prescription. That's great. But the second meaning of prescription is a demand, a dictate. It's no longer a suggestion. It's an order. That's also a definition of prescription. And prescription has a friend, proscription. And whereas prescription is to advise you of something for your betterment, proscription is a process of banning, of prohibiting. So the prescriptivist will say, you should really do this or that because it's good. The proscriptive person is going to say, you shouldn't. And we have somehow gone from prescriptive, which is some nice old clergyman in England around the time of the American Revolution, telling people that if they wanted to sound elegant and write in an elevated style, that he would give them some guidance. And his guidance was based on Latin because he was an educated man. And in 1762, when he wrote his book, Latin was everything. That was just the language. Now, the man's name was Robert Lowth. And you will hear that name. You don't have to worry about that name, but you will hear that name pronounced differently. One of my professors called him Loth, rhyming with both. I, on the other hand, believe that the name Louth came from Lowther, which is a common British name from the north of England, dating back to the conquest. Names are another thing that are of interest to me. And I think that Louth was part of the Lowther family. And if you will recall, last week when we spoke about our voiced and voiceless dental fricatives, those are our TH sounds, we discussed thorn being the voiceless fricative, th, as opposed to ev being the voiced, th. So I believe it is Louth with the ev. And just so you know, all of this does tie in together. I'm not just giving you random bits of trivia. We're going to pull them back and forth. And what we talk about last week, we're going to talk about next week. We're going to reference these things. So that's our little bit of dental fricative reference for today. Well, Louth was a British clergyman, and he had gotten it into his head that the best way to help the masses, the hoi polloi, which is basically you and me, was to create a written English grammar. This was not the first English grammar, but it was far and away the most popular. It was the one that caught on. The first English grammars have been written almost 200 years earlier, but they never really caught on. And mostly they were written in Latin, and they were reserved for the schoolroom. Louth's book just got out there. And what he wanted to do, okay, we've all seen My Fair Lady. And we remember, I'm sure, when Henry Higgins looks at Colonel Pickering and says, "It is not her dirty face or ragged clothes that keeps this girl in the gutter. It's her appalling English." Well, that was Louth's thinking. He thought if he could help people, not because the people with education in those days were the sons of gentlemen, and they all spoke Latin, and they were going to go into Parliament and whatever. And the rest of us, hoi polloi, which, by the way, included the daughters of, the gentlemen, because women were poorly educated in those days, that if you could just give them some rules, give them something, then they could speak and write with elegance. And what he referred to was the elevated style. And the use of the word elevated is very telling, because that was his goal. He wanted to elevate the people who didn't have education, didn't have educational opportunities, women, Scots and Welsh and Irish, foreigners, anybody who wasn't the son of an earl, basically. He was just saying, here you go, here's how you do it, and this will teach you to write with an elevated style. Of course, he based it all on Latin. Everything was based on Latin. Latin was the end-all and be-all. Now, Louth's mistake was this notion that English could be cut according to a Latin pattern. English and Latin are not the same language. I mean, we all know that. They are part of the Indo-European language family, but Latin is a Romance language and English is a Germanic language, so they're very different. They branched off a long time ago, and English in particular, especially by the time you hit 1762 when he was writing, had gone through massive changes. English is, in my opinion, it's a fantastic language. It really is. Among other things that we have going for us is the largest word count of any language. We have over 170,000 words. The next largest wordy language is Russian with 150,000. And if you've ever listened to Russian, that's perfectly understandable. Spanish only has 93,000, and that's number 3, by the way. So at 170,000, over 170, I think it was 171,000, we are at almost twice the number of words of the third wordiest language. So English is a language that really allows for an incredible range of expression. But a lot of this is because English changed a lot over the centuries. We have written English going back over 1,000 years. Now, we don't have much. We have a little. But we have this documented. So we know about the changes that English has undergone. We used to have genders and all sorts of modifications of our nouns and verbs, just like other languages. We don't anymore. The reason we don't, by the way, is probably the Viking influence. When the Vikings came to England, they had to learn the language. They learned it well enough to be understood, and they spoke a simple English, and that simple English caught on. So we're very lucky that we have that in our language. It made it, in many ways, very, very easy for us. So, back to Louth. He did not intend to just make miserable rules. Well, he didn't intend to make rules to begin with. He intended to offer some suggestions. But he had this book. This book became popular, and suddenly it became a rule. Hey, why not? It's written in a book, And this is 1762, when books were not exactly commonplace. And if you could hold it up and say, it's in a book, well, the expression carved in stone, it kind of was. So among the oddities that he came up with was English should not end on a preposition. The best refutation of that was Winston Churchill's, and we can all agree, I hope, that Winston Churchill was one of the great speakers of the 20th century. He motivated 2 nations through a war. Thank you very much. By the way, he's half ours, so the Brits don't get to take full credit for him. His mother was American. Never forget that. That's why Winston Churchill was great. So, someone apparently caught him ending on a preposition, and his response was, well, that is something up with which I shall not put. Pointing out the obvious stupidity of a rule like that. We have a lot of idiomatic expressions like put up with that do, in fact, end on a preposition, and once you start rearranging them, you lose the idiom and they make no sense. Another of Louth's little bizarreness was whom. He liked the word whom for some reason. Now, whom was a word that in the 18th century, when he was writing his book, was passing out of our language. A lot of words were. Whom was an Old English word, and it was originally wham. And this is another thing we talked about in a previous installment of Wordy Wednesday, metathesis. Remember, we spoke about how axion and ascion were virtually interchangeable because of this process of metathesis, which is when you switch letters. That's how 3 becomes third. How brid, which is what a bird used to be called, becomes bird. And ascion, axion is sort of flipped. Now, the HW, that was with all of our WH words, a whale, which, who, where, when. They were all HW words. Metathesis switched that. But for some reason, he took a shine to whom. He liked that one. And I guess he thought we needed a version of who that corresponded as who corresponds to he or she, whom corresponds to him or her. And by immortalizing it in his book, he saved a word that was probably just going to go out of fashion. Is this good or bad? Who knows? I mean, he saved a word. Saving a word is a good thing. Dumping it on people when it's totally unnecessary is probably not such a good thing. There is almost no sentence using the word whom that wouldn't be equally understandable using the word who instead. So this is where the weird rules come from. Latin. And Latin has some peculiarities. Latin is basically a dead language now. There is no people that speak Latin. I have a cousin that teaches Latin, and she gets together with other Latin teachers. They go off for like a week, and I think that it's Cape Cod they go to. They rent a summer house, and they all speak Latin to one another. But it just shows you that geekiness runs in the family. Other than that, Latin is a dead language. It's kept alive by academics. There is not a Latin-speaking country or even city somewhere, well, unless you consider Vatican City, and I'm not even sure they really speak Latin there. Latin doesn't allow you to end a sentence on a preposition. Latin does have words that correspond to whom and him and her and whatnot, but Latin is not English. Totally different language. So we have a lot of rules that just don't make sense. Now, I am a big believer in grammatical rules if they make sense. And we had discussed this before. A linguist I respect very much had said, well, what's wrong with me and Billy went to the store? Well, the problem with that is if you take out Billy, you're saying me went to the store. That's the problem. So that's a rule that in fact does make sense. Billy and I went to the store, because you wouldn't say me and Billy. And I think if people went around saying me went to the store, we would be inclined to consider them either foreign or not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So when a rule makes sense, great. But if it doesn't make sense, for example, clinging to whom or ending on a preposition, we need to think twice about that. Another one is they. And they is becoming popular today in place of he, him, man. And the reason for this is because, of course, it's inherently sexist. So if you were to say, if someone needs my help, he should come to me. Well, what if he is a she? And you're deliberately excluding women. But there are people who will argue with you if you say, if someone needs help, they should come to me, because I've switched and I've gone from our third person singular to our third person plural, and the rules say I shouldn't do that. There is a long history of doing that in the English language, some of which rather significantly dates Robert Louth, by the way. So this is something that I think is passing, and it should. I mean, there's no question about it. This is something that must pass. We did have a non-gender specific third person singular word in Old English. And by the way, when I say Old English, what I'm really talking about is West Saxon, because there were a lot of varieties of Old English, but West Saxon is the one that survived, because this is because of Alfred the Great. We'll talk more about this at a later date because it's really interesting, but it is because Alfred was in the area where West Saxon was spoken, and Alfred wanted people to learn to write. So when they learned to write, they weren't learning Mercian, they were learning West Saxon. So we'll talk about that at another time. The next culprit on our list is a fellow named Lindley Murray, who was American. Now, Robert Louth was a minister, a clergyman, and so he wasn't a linguist. He wasn't even really a teacher. Lindley Murray was an American lawyer, and he wrote a couple of books. Now, by the way, you see these two paragraphs? These are the titles of his 2 books. I had to write them down because I knew I would never be able to remember them. His first book, written in 1795. And because of our timeline, remember, Louth was a contemporary of Benjamin Franklin. They basically lived through the 18th century together. Lindley Murray is writing around the same time that Jane Austen is writing, just so we have some perspective. His first book, English Grammar Adapted to the Different Classes of Learners, with an appendix containing rules and observations for assisting the more advanced students to write with perspicuity and accuracy, by Lindley Murray. There are 4 commas in that sentence and 1 period. Now let me give you the follow-up book title. English Exercises Adapted to the Grammar, lately published by L. Murray, consisting of exemplifications of the parts of speech, instances of false orthography, violations of the rules of syntax, defects in punctuation, and violations of the rules respecting perspicuity and accuracy, designed for the benefit of private learners as well as for the use of schools. 1 sentence, 3 colons and 5 commas before you get to the period. This guy just clearly found like a fire sale at the punctuation store. And defects in punctuation. I would say offhand, 3 colons and 5 commas in a single sentence is what I would call a defect in punctuation. But notice the words he's using. False orthography, violations of the rules of syntax, defects in punctuation, violations of the rules respecting perspicuity and accuracy. We have gone from prescriptive, which is what Louth was. He was attempting to help people better themselves, like Eliza Doolittle, so she could speak proper English and get a job as a shop girl instead of selling her flowers on the street. Well, Murray has gone to telling us what not to do. This is proscriptive. And this is, it's beyond merely dictatorial. It's dictatorial in a very negative way. So, and we see this today, by the way, when someone corrects your grammar. In general, they don't say, well, if you said XYZ, it would sound a little better. Usually they look at you and say, that's wrong. Well, that's Murray. So Murray is writing this at the same time that Jane Austen is writing. So he certainly had the benefit of some very, very good, yes, I got you, very, very good writers of the English language. I mean, he is well post-Shakespeare and ought to know better than, 3 colons and 5 commas. But at this point, it was dictating the rules of the language. So primarily, where we are now is with a language, a legacy that has come to us from a kindly minister who was hoping to elevate people. Remember, that was what he said, elevated style. And he was trying to better people. And an American lawyer, who was, by the way, a Quaker, so I'm sure he was a very kindly person too. Quakers are not known for being, vicious reprobates. But certainly, he was attempting to freeze our language, to keep change from coming in, which is not only foolish, but it's impossible. And to tell us how we were all screwing up and doing it wrong. So, Who died and made you boss of my language? Well, it must have been Loudon Murray. Now, what we could take away from this is, as long as you are not violating rules that make sense, that create cohesion in our language. For example, the whole me and Billy thing, and I'm sure, as I said, this is a linguist whom I respect, who doesn't see anything wrong with that. And I gotta say, as long as you're not like totally out there, you need to ask yourself, am I making myself understood? Does my sentence hang together? What would it be like if I rephrased it? You're going to be fine. By the way, whom, there's an easy, if you want to know how to use the word whom, and we might as well take something practical application out of this. I know I'm giving in to Louth when I say this, and I shouldn't. I should just say no. Louth meant well, but he was wrong. We need to walk away from whom. Here's the rule on whom. Whom corresponds to him, to her, not to he and she. He and she correspond to who. So, to whom am I going to give this? Well, I'm going to give it to him. And that's how it works. So properly, I wouldn't say who do I give it to, because the response would be her, you see. Now also I have to say, who do I give this to? That makes perfect sense. It does not sound ignorant. It does not sound wrong or bad, at least not to my ear. To whom shall I give this, however, to me, sounds rather pretentious. It sounds affected. Would I do this in academic writing? Yes, absolutely. Academic writing, oh, I will Louth you into next year. But in ordinary writing, in ordinary speaking, no, absolutely not. So, this is what happened. This is how we got here. And hopefully, now that we know this, we can start talking about some other things, because 170,000 words. The English language is beautiful, and there's a lot to have fun with. All right, I will not see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Thursday, so it's my second day off. I have to cut grass. But I will see you on Friday. Meantime, have a great day. And if you're going to be writing, watch those colons and commas. You really don't need any more than 2 or 3 of each in a sentence. See you later.